There are three very clear ways to take home $1 million a year as a dentist. One involves working full-time, one involves working part-time, and one involves not picking up a handpiece.
There's two things I want to say.
This is amazing. Welcome to the Shared Practices Podcast 2.0. We are rebooting this podcast from scratch, new hosts, new topics, everything relevant to 2024 and moving forward. Not 8-year-old content, not content that's diluted by, pre-owner content getting really mixed into the owner content. This podcast moving forward is the place where if you want to grow a dental business, you should be here. We are going to have a separate feed for pre-owners, so we might touch on some of that over these next few episodes. But if you want to listen to, hey, how do I get into practice ownership? The Pursuit of Ownership is where you're going to hear those episodes. So there'll be a link in the show notes as well. If you're wondering what the heck happened to all of the old Shared Practices content, we've moved that to a separate feed, the archives of Shared Practices, and the links for that will be in the notes. But before we get too much further, I have some amazing co-hosts to introduce. There's that, is it the David Letterman show? My next guest needs no introduction, but I want to welcome to the show my co-host, Dr. Scott Leune. Scott, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm so excited for this kind of new chapter in the podcast. And I just can't wait to dive in. And I'm just bursting to talk and to interview other people and to just allow all of our experiences to come in raw, applicable. And hopefully that makes this a very fresh experience for people listening in that are looking for just the real stuff right now.
I love it. This is like years in the making of. We have been super fans of you for a long time, and you know that. And it's people come up to us and tell us like, oh my goodness, I've been listening to your podcast for 8 years and I've listened to every episode. And we get to do that for you of like, oh, okay, we were reading Breakaway stuff or your content back on Dental Town, before any of it got crystallized into the content that it became. And then your events have transformed our journeys and given us a foundation of entrepreneurship to really build upon. So it is a delight and a lot of fun for us to be in this position where we can create content together and help dentists out to be better business owners and better entrepreneurs. So Scott, I'm stoked.
Awesome. Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't introduce my other co-host, our other primary guest. He wants to be referred to as, which is a way of delegating. George is like, you guys got this. Our co-host, Dr. George Hariri. George, how's it going?
Yeah, I've been excited to get going on Shared Practices 2.0. I feel like, we've been doing this for 8 years, and a lot's changed in 8 years, both with us, our thoughts, and the industry as a whole. And we'd be remiss to not, take Shared Practices back to its best days again. And, I'm really excited for the combination that we're going to have with you and Scott carrying the podcast forward on a regular basis. And, I'm going to be here as well. And so I'm excited to dive into today's topic. And, today's topic's really fun for me because it's the IP blend, right? Scott and us, we have our own language on how we refer to things. And I'm excited to kind of ask him some questions about the $1 Million Dentist and see, where our different philosophies kind of blend and where we might have some differences. And so I think Shared Practices has always been unique in that we share the best practices and there's not always one size fits all. And bringing Scott on the show, we get his best perspectives in our shared practices. And then together, with those, hopefully we have even better content than we've ever had. And so I'm really excited for this next chapter of the show. And I can't wait to dive in.
Well, and our listeners, if our listeners have no clue who any of us are, we will do like more of a backstory episode in the future, but we don't want to really waste a lot of time on that now. But we'll kind of tell our full stories in future episodes for people who are new to Shared Practices, who are new to Scott Leune. We'll do that, but in traditional Shared Practices, form, we want to get straight into the good stuff right up front. Like let's really actually talk about stuff that is fun for us to talk about and we want to explore. So you mentioned it, George. This idea of the $1 million dentist, and we haven't talked about this as much in shared practices. We kind of talk about here's all these different ways to get there, but I love the concreteness, the concrete, like this provides focus. This is my goal. How can I get there? So Scott, I want to hear, where did this come from for you, and how did you decide, okay, I want to tell the story of how dentists can get to being a $1 million dentist?
Well, it came in part due to the fact that everyone in our profession that I seem to bump into and talk to about profitability was actually describing a scenario that I would think would never get to this point. They think profit comes from things that I was not doing and I was not seeing. They think profit comes from growing bigger, building bigger, having more, and unfortunately, more production, more collections, more patients doesn't always equal more profit, and definitely doesn't always equal more happiness. And so as I started helping build all these startup practices, which it's been hundreds of startup practices, I saw that our startup practices were getting to $1 million take home pay by year 3 to 4 typically. And of course, that was in the time where $350,000 take home pay was like viewed as like really good, and we're at $1 million, and it wasn't from following the bigger is better model. And I took that experience combined with the fact that my own experience as a dentist, working 1 day a week, my second year out of school in a wheelchair, I took home more than $1.1 million that year in a different way. And as I started seeing these stories and these paths and measuring and looking at profit and loss statements and doing what I do for my career, I've made it my career's work, studying the science of dental business. I recognize there are 3 very clear ways to take home $1 million a year as a dentist. One involves working full time, one involves working part time, and one involves not picking up a handpiece. And once I saw the clarity on how to get there, we just started having all kinds of people get there very soon. And that became an exciting thing for me to share because it was so different than what we in dentistry expected to be possible.
I love the fact that when you talk about $1 million dentist, you are not talking about what was coined 15, 20 years ago of the $1 million practice of like $1 million in collections. We're talking about $1 million of profit take home, as the owner operator, and including whatever degree of clinical involvement that you want that fits you. And you've seen it, you've done it, and you've helped people do it over and over and over. And season 1 of Shared Practices addressed this issue of like, should I own? Should I be an owner? So we're in episode 1 of Shared Practices 2.0. I think that question is a moot point at this point. Like, we'll maybe touch on that in the pre-owner podcast, but for here, it's like, okay, we're committed to ownership, but I want to know the same version of this, but for these types of practices, or these types of ways of getting to $1 million practice take home. So should I go down one of these 3 routes, and which one suits me, and what are the opportunities and challenges? And then in future episodes, we're going to dedicate a whole episode to kind of each one of these journeys, and really get into this, and probably whole future seasons and kind of topics in the show will revolve around various aspects of this. But George, I want to hear your take on this $1 million take home dentist, and like the emotions that creates for you, and the story that we tell to our audience, in person at our courses and our podcast. How does that fit in with what the language that we use in describing what's possible for a dental practice?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that comes to mind is one of our avatars that we call Super Solo, which is, the first iteration of Scott's frameworks for the $1 million dentist, which is that single producer who's able to produce their way to a 7-figure income. And I think that, my first, I think if I were to like always your personality sometimes can influence the way that you lecture and teach. And for me, I'm the no time, no handpiece, type of dentist. And so for me, I think I look at this and I say, well, I want to hear Scott's thoughts on the sustainability of the 7-figure income for the heavy producer, or the sustainability of, someone's ability to work as hard as it required on a regular basis to take home that type of income, at least as the first one, as a full-time owner. Right. So I think that's where maybe Scott's personality and my personalities are very different, where I think Scott's personality might be more in line with that type of individual than mine. And so that's like the first, when I saw kind of the outline for the $1 Million Dentist, my first question was, I'm really excited to ask Scott about the super solo, because, at our seminars, we sometimes call it the stressful solo. And, I'm really interested to see, what is Scott seeing on his side that makes this sustainable that we haven't necessarily seen on our side?
So it's so funny because right when you were describing super solo, you were describing a different dentist than what I'm just describing in my mind. And I was saying to myself, we should probably rename that the smart solo, not the super solo. And then you named it the stress solo. And I'm like, yeah, we're definitely describing two different people. So yes, we could get to high production numbers being super, doing super dentistry, having super speed, managing a super kind of volume of people and patients and employees. And that is a hard way to do it. I would prefer that we don't use the super path as the model, but we have a smart path that's almost like a light way of doing it. A path that only has 4 or 5 ops, a path that only has a handful of employees, a path where the dentist has openings every day and they're not having to cover an army of hygienists, and they don't have to do super dentistry. You see, an interesting thing about, math when it comes to dentistry is the bigger our expenses, the more super we have to be to pay for them. And if we can take this kind of two-prong approach that says we are going to have a beautiful practice that has smaller expense base, then we have to be less super on the clinical side to get into profitable territory. And how we get to the profitable territory on the clinical side could be with heavier lifting, or it could be with lightly lifting expensive things. We can get to the same number multiple different ways. So maybe right off the bat, I want to clarify, when I think of the full-time owner-operator dentist taking home $1 million take-home pay, I think of someone that is a little bit bored every day with a small team, with a very manageable patient base, in a beautiful office that has lower expenses. And that is what I envision. I do not envision being super. I do not envision being tired. I do not envision big anything except profit. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And this is like productive solo is really what this sounds like to me, is an extremely well executed productive solo. No. Okay.
No. So imagine
so help
this.
us out here. We're not understanding this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we just do a bunch of math, and we will get to the details in the next episode, because I think we need at least an hour to teach A to Z how to do this solo version. But just from a high level, to make sure we're not getting too confused already, to get to $1 million take-home pay in a low overhead model, we're collecting about $2 million. And if we're going to work full time, we're in an earlier part of our career. We're like, we don't mind working. We don't mind working full time as long as it doesn't burn us out. We're good showing up to work. To collect $2 million per year, we're doing about 5,500 a day on the doctor's schedule. That assumes hygienists are mediocre producers at best. The doctor's going to be at 5,500 a day. Now, what's the really light way to do 5,500 a day? The really light way is if we know 1 or 2 or 3 kind of larger type procedures, and we drip one in a day. Like we got an Invisalign case, once or twice a week that we start. Maybe we place an implant, once a week. And very quickly, like one Invisalign case got us to 5,500 a day without the dentistry. And so you could see, if we know how to do those types of procedures, we dramatically lighten the load of our schedule to achieve the 5,500 a day kind of goal. And if we don't know how to do any of that stuff, that's okay. How do we get there the old fashioned way? With bread and butter dentistry. Now, are we on low fee or high fee bread and butter dentistry? So there's that lever too. So, in the beginning, maybe if we're doing a startup, we've got openings everywhere, we're in network with plans, we're a lower fee bread and butter dentistry. But if we can operate the practice well so that our excess new patient leads come in and we actually answer those calls and we actually schedule them and we actually retain those patients and we diagnose plenty and people say yes to plenty, our schedule and our small little practice is going to be full in no time. And we are going to have the power to drop out of those ridiculous plans we might have been in. So to get to that $5,500 a day number, the bread and butter way, hopefully we are growing in our fees and we can get there with less and less patients as well. But I bet any owner listening to this, even many associates, have looked at their career and said, I've done 5,500 a day plenty of times. And those aren't necessarily the stressful days. The stressful days seem to be when I didn't do that much, but I saw a whole lot of people and I had to cover a lot of hygienists. You see, so 5,500 a day, not a stressful number to hit if we are thoughtful and deliberate about how we get there.
So Scott, I want to ask you some questions. I wrote down 5,500 a day, and I assumed 4 days a week. Is that your assumption as well, or are you assuming 5?
Well, let's just do the math. Let's say we've got a dentist in the first 10 years of their career, and they're like, I don't mind working 5 days a week. Maybe they're going to be 6-hour days.
Okay.
Right? What else am I going to do on a Friday? I'm here to pay off debt. I'm here to build wealth for my family. I'm ready to work. I just want to work in a healthy environment. So let's just do the math. If we've got 2 million in collections we need, right? Divided by 12 months, now we're at 167,000 per month. We're going to have that's going to equate, if we divide that by the 21 days or so in a month we might work, that's 8,000 a day, right? 8,000 a day. That is hygiene and the doctor side. Hygiene's going to account for approximately 2/3 to maybe 70% or so, or excuse me, hygiene is going to count for 1/3. Right. The doctor side is going to count for 2/3 to maybe 70% in a practice that doesn't do huge cases. And so that brings us to that $5,500 a day mark, 5 days a week.
Yeah, I
if
see
you're
that
wanting
now.
to work 4 days a week, it's going to be a little more than 5,500 a day.
Yeah, and my numbers now show that, if we're working 5 days a week at 5,500 a day, that's 110,000 on the doctor side each month, and then that extra 55,000 on hygiene gets us to our $2 million per year run rate. So that's a third hygiene, 2/3 doctor at 5,500 a day for 5 days a week. That adds up. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And people might be listening to this and like, okay, well, how do we get to 110,000 a month? I mean, I don't know if I've ever had a month that big. Well, you haven't had a month that big as an associate, maybe because you are not controlling your destiny. You are not the one making the decisions around marketing, branding, your employees. You're not the one making decisions about how you're scheduled. You also maybe haven't learned how to grab high case acceptance numbers out of your career. And it doesn't take a lot of small changes of all those things I just listed for you to have an exponentially different result. The dentists that commonly do more than $100,000 a month, some of those dentists do it because they know all on X. Okay, I'm not talking about them. Some of those dentists do it because they are freaking hyperspeed dentists. And I'm not talking about them either. I'm talking about the 80% in the middle that hit that number. They hit it because they've got healthy patient flow, healthy case acceptance, healthy retention, and they just do regular dentistry. And that is an easy way to get to this number when you understand patient flow, diagnosis, case acceptance, when you understand how to control those factors as an owner.
Here's George, where my thoughts go with this. We have tended to grow practices. And so there's not been a big emphasis in our framework of let's find this like smart, optimized solo that is turning excess demand into reduced insurance participation and increased fee schedules. And I think that's where this is kind of this little third avatar of like we're doing more by dropping insurance participation, being a little bit more in control of our fee schedule, and optimizing for this ideal flow, and including that fifth day. We've kind of always assumed a little bit lazier of a dentist who wants to work a little bit less. Um, but I absolutely can see this like as a, you know what, hey, let's work. I mean, like I have no problem with 5 days of work. Maybe, compared to any other career where I could be working 5 days a week, the take home is better. And that fifth day, the amount of margin that fifth day adds, and the ability to kind of top out a little further, is I also think maybe something that we've underestimated and underemphasized in our framework. So,
But I know we're saying 4 or 5 days. I'm describing 30 hours. So that could be, that could be 3 days, so 30 hours. But if it's like a 6 hour day, you're doing 5 days a week, you start seeing patients at 8 and you're done at 2, and you don't eat lunch or whatever. That's $5,500 for a 6 hour kind of day.
okay.
This is about $915 an hour.
So using an analogy, cars. I love I don't collect cars or anything like that, but I love gorgeous cars. I love cars that can perform, and I've got a couple of them. If you drive too slow in a car, you just don't get where you want to go. It's very frustrating. It's not definitely a great way and an efficient way to drive. But if you drive too fast, you are burning more fuel than you had to. You're putting more strain on the car. There's this kind of magical 55-mile-an-hour way that puts the least amount of strain on the car and gives you the most gas mileage, right? And if we can run our career at like that beautiful 55-mile-an-hour pace, we could drive like that for a really long time, especially if we're taking home $1 million. So another kind of reason why I think you and I and others have initially assumed, let's make this a 4-day-a-week model, is because the days themselves burn us out too much. But if we make the days short and enjoyable, and we're in an earlier part of our career, then it might be very easy. It tastes great to go ahead and just work 5 partial days a week at 55 miles an hour.
I love this. And this is why we wanted to have these conversations, because you can only see what you've seen, and this is stretching our framework. It's stretching what we've
Yeah.
seen and what we've preached and what we've taught. And we've always had a humility to what we do at shared practices of like, we have the data, we've got the results, we've got the growth. Um, but there's a lot of different ways to do dentistry. We streamlined to our profitable, simple, sustainable avatars, and there are other avatars. There are other things that are out there, and we want the best. We want to include all the different ways. And this is highlighting a way that it's like we have not emphasized or we have not driven towards as much. George, what are you thinking about with all this?
I couldn't echo what you're saying more. One of the things that, I've said publicly and privately is that when we add Scott Leune to shared practices and we get our IP together, there's an iteration that's going to happen on our philosophy that's natural, right? We need to take what he brings to the table and add it to what we have. And that transition from super solo to smart solo is a fantastic example of how we had one belief, right? And we come in with that. And then with new information, your mind changes, right? And so from my perspective, like I think that on our first episode, we just saw right there, right? Super solo can be done differently to make it from stressful to smart and sustainable. And I guess my question for you, Scott, is every time I've lectured or taught super solo, I've always questioned the sustainability of it. And my example is I've never met anybody in our ecosystem in the shared practices world that has chosen to stay there long term. So they might do it for a period. And then after that period, there's like, okay, I want to get the associate. I want to go more entrepreneurial in my practice. I want to go have a group practice. Like there's some type of transition point for them. And, maybe you're with more experience, having interacted with more dentists, you may have like an avatar of person that stays here long term for their whole career. And so if you could help us that's, I think, the piece that maybe for me is a little bit unclear is like, do you know of many people that have stayed in that $1 million per year, $2 million per year practice as a solo long term, and maybe help us understand their personalities and just what that person is like?
Yeah. I think the vast majority of dentists that do this should stay in that phase long term. Because when you start reducing your time and you start expanding your facility, you are permanently increasing your cost base, and you are also giving up some of the control over the productivity and the quality of dentistry that's being done. And so you're kind of trading money and clinical time now for potentially losses, risk, and administrative time. And so I don't believe most people should leave that 55-mile-an-hour, incredibly lucrative setup. But if you do, there's very thoughtful ways to do it, right? So I think that a lot of people, once they achieve success in dentistry, they get a little bit high on the success and almost like a little bit of subconscious greed and ego and wanting kind of to be the next bigger thing. And, because there's always a bigger thing, that's a loop. There's no like finish line to that race. You continuously add more and more cost, risk, more debt, more time, and that can spin out of control. So I think when we talk about the three kind of categories we've described on taking home $1 million, where we are going to be the solo operator full-time, then we're going to go to a part-time setup, and then a no clinical time setup. I don't view them as three choices, although they could be, but I view them as a linear path. So I would love to take home $1 million first with the least amount of risk, being the only dentist with a small manageable enterprise, and then cut my time down to part-time in a very specific way, never losing $1 million take-home pay so that I'm always stable in life. And then after that, down the line, not pick up the handpiece. Again, never losing that $1 million take-home pay minimum. And to me, when it's linear, it builds boundaries to make really smart decisions in. We don't make decisions that could risk our take-home pay and therefore risk our lifestyle. We don't make decisions that could break the good we have. So because that creates compromise in our life, in our health, in our time, in our mental stability, and when you hear the stories of people burning out, some of those stories are because they grew quickly. They added a bunch of locations, a bunch of associates, and they added them on a lower fee model, which is even riskier. They could have gotten on a higher fee, higher margin model first and cashed in those chips and controlled their destiny a little more before then expanding that. So what's the avatar? I think that the avatar is a dentist that understands what I'm just saying. It's not a certain age, a certain gender, a certain race, a certain mindset. It's all about understanding how to do things in different ways. When you fully understand what you can, it's easier to make a decision on what makes sense for you now. That's the other thing. None of these decisions are permanent. They're all super changeable, So we can't get lost in the analysis. We can't get lost in the what if. Someday I might want this or that. Don't get lost in the future. The future doesn't even exist. Then the past doesn't even exist. The only thing that exists is right now. And what's the best thing we can do right now to get us the money we need in a practice we're proud of, delivering great care to patients, and just having the time and the mental strength to dedicate to the rest of our life? I think most people should stick to the 55 mile an hour solo model when they achieve $1 million take home pay for those reasons.
And Richard,
George,
this is something you've been saying for quite a long time.
this is so validating for me, because one of the things I'm conscious of in our podcast is that there is a degree of entrepreneurialism, a degree of willingness to take on risk, a degree of willingness to kind of step back, become more admin, that a lot of dentists just don't have. They don't have that like drive to go more, bigger, 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 or they don't want to step back. They actually like taking care of patients. They like doing clinical care. And I've always wanted to talk to that dentist. I skew a little bit more that way, and one of the absolute things that led to my recent mental health burnout and crash in this year was the growth of SPG, which was astronomical and very intense. And so I've lived the downsides of scale. And there's like there's definitely a part of me that, like, when Scott outlines this, like, okay, $1 million of profitability here, maintaining that, growing, next phase, maintaining that, growing, following phase, there's a part of me that wants to say, as they say these days, bet, like, okay, let's do this, or hold my beer. Like, okay, we might have to be more patient. I think we've lacked patience in our desire to grow practices. And I think there's a slower, more deliberate, it's like we're used to this in like 1-2 year like phases, versus maybe this is a 2 year phase or a 3 year phase of really tweaking and optimizing and getting to this $1 million take home. And then it's a little bit slower of a transition. I might be wrong in that. The other thing that comes to mind is, you're talking about a $2 million practice, $1 million take home, which assumes a 50% overhead, which fits maybe a variety of markets. There's also a part of me that's like, how can I make this lazier? If you have a lower overhead, then you really don't even have to do 2 million. Like, if you're able to keep that overhead, 600K, 700K, then you're doing 1.6, 1.7, and we're even more kind of sustainable in this. So I want to hear your response to those things, Scott, or unless, George, you have something else to comment on what Scott had just said.
I do, but I think I'd like to hear Scott's answer.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So, of course, when you look at a model and the model says 2 million collections, the model says 50% overhead, it's all about understanding that that is highly achievable in nearly all market conditions. Yep. But if you've got strength to keep your overhead even lower, or you've got strength to do more than 5,500 a day, of course it could be even lazier, or it could be even better. Of course. And we definitely strive for that. But what I've noticed is that once you take home $1 million take home pay as a dentist, you start deciding to make different, or you start making different decisions in your life and in your career. And assuming you don't get an unhealthy amount of high from the success, and you like go all in again, and you keep double or nothing, because you think this is like some game about being big, right? Let's put that aside. That is very unhealthy. If we look at just the health of taking home $1 million a year, however you got there, once you're there in a sustainable way, a lot of people choose to not focus so much on dentistry. Let's just maintain that easy $1 million paying job that you have full control over and go build a life, right? So that's what I see a lot of people go to. Now, I don't want to underscore the fact that the second phase of taking home $1 million when you're working part-time is even lazier. It's even easier. But a healthy way to get there is to do the first phase first. And now some dentists are going to have a hard time getting to the first phase because they bought a 9-op practice that has high rent, and they can't control their supply expenses, and we're all suffering from high staff costs, but they have a model right off the bat that is a higher cost model. And it's emotionally difficult for them sometimes to peel that away, to cut away those costs. One quick story, I've got a client of mine that just hired me as their personal coach, and they are almost done expanding their practice from 5 ops to like 8 or 9 ops. And one of the first things we decided when we started coaching together is to not hire associates and to not even use the ops. They're almost done building, not even use them. And I told him, look, if I were to buy your practice today, I'd use the 5 ops. I'd make $1 million. And I'd be like, yeah, it's kind of nice. I got 8 or 9. Someday, maybe I will use them, but I'm not going to go use them now because I expected I should because they exist. I'm going to get on a model first that brings me success immediately. I'm getting a trophy every year. I'm winning. I'm not hoping for the future, hoping for something that doesn't exist. I'm winning. Maybe someday I will use those other ops, or maybe I'll never use them. And that was just a mistake I made in my career. But what's worse, a worse mistake than adding ops when we don't need to is using them when we shouldn't use them. That's a worse mistake. That is an ongoing, every month, every year, costly mistake. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I have a very different take on a lot of like your perspective. And I think it goes down to a fundamental where I think, Scott, you operate on the idea of get the consistent income for the stable lifestyle and then progress slowly through entrepreneurship without risking that income going down. And, for me, I'll tell my story. I was the dentist and I just went straight to no time. And I did that with the idea in mind that I knew my income would drop and I didn't care, because for me, the lifestyle freedom was more important than the income. And I think that we've always catered more to that dentist who has the entrepreneurial passion and is more patient through the unstable income period or the not maintaining their high income the whole time. And so I think that when you look at different dentists with different levels of entrepreneurship, there's going to be some that are going to, like for me, I couldn't make enough money to go into the office 5 days a week and do dentistry. Like I just, that isn't something I could ever really get myself to do. And then there's someone else who's like, are you kidding me? I would do that for, whatever. And I think that different types of dentists have different experiences and relationships with entrepreneurship. And for me, it's always been like, I like to keep my personal expenses de-risked so that I can take risk on the professional side. And, I think then there's the alternative mindset where it's like, I want my income to be high so that I can enjoy my personal life and have a comfortable lifestyle the whole time. And I'm okay taking multiple years between phases. And I think that we've always said, how can we get there fast? And just like, we call it the ugly duckling in the middle. And so I think that it's very interesting how we've taken the same problem, which is, helping dentists, own, operate. And, we've definitely taken the slant more towards the entrepreneurial side. And I think that, you've taken the slant more towards the maintaining the income. And I think that that's a very interesting difference.
In this part of the discussion, we're talking about maintaining that income. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I've gone the opposite route and helped so many people do it. But if we look back to what was the problem we were actually trying to solve, I think a lot of people are trying to solve the problem that they would like to have more money than they need, and they would like to spend their time earning that money in a way that is enjoyable and sustainable.
Yeah.
Okay. If we just define that as success, then how can we get there? Well, we could just quit picking up the handpiece because we think that is going to be enjoyable and sustainable. Or we could also solve the problems of having the handpiece in our hand that make it unenjoyable and now make that an enjoyable environment. And I'm so thankful that I get to sit from the position of watching and talking to and coaching thousands of dentists over my career. So I get to see how they all do it and where their pain points are. And unfortunately, when you're not in a position like mine or like ours, you only see what you know, what you've done, and the people you've spoken to directly. You may not see that it's possible to do dentistry and to not be burnout, for example.
Yeah.
So if we can do dentistry and not be burnout and have more money than we ever need, that might be the win. Or some people are like, well, I still don't want to do much dentistry. I still only want to do dentistry part-time. Great. There's a way to do that thoughtfully well. Or some are like, I really don't want to pick up the handpiece. The minute I got to dental school, I realized I hate teeth or whatever it is, and there's a great model for that too. But don't justify becoming an entrepreneur because of other pain points that could be solvable in a much smarter way. I'm
And I
not
guess,
saying that's what happened with you guys, but you know what I mean? A lot of
yeah.
dentists say, I just want to focus on the business side. They know nothing about business. They've never done it before. What they're really saying is the clinical side's burning me out.
And I guess my question for you is, what are the common pain points that the heavy clinician experiences, and what are some of the remedies that can really transform that experience for them?
One pain point is a more macro pain point. It says, I don't feel like I could ever take off time. I don't feel like I could ever be sick. I can't go on vacation because I just have to show up to work. That is a problem in their thinking because it's not actually true. So in a real kind of like, I could talk about that for several episodes, by the way, just what I just said. But if we kind of think on a macro level here, what if I want to take 2 weeks off for vacation? I'll just take 2 weeks off for vacation as a dentist. Well, what about my employees? I'll keep paying them to work full time. Well, what are they going to do? Whatever I say they need to do while I'm gone. And I'm not going to produce nearly as much when I'm gone. But that's okay. My bills stay the same every month. And my collections will be a little bit diluted for the next 2 months because I took 2 weeks off. And that's okay, especially if I'm making $1 million take home pay a year. Even if I'm making $500,000 take home pay a year, that's okay. Here's the other beautiful thing. If I have holes in my schedule, commonly, not crazy, but just I have a few every day, and I take 2 weeks off, those holes get filled before and after my vacation, and I might produce the exact same amount taking 2 weeks off, which therefore I have the same collections and I have the same expenses and I'm in the same place, but I didn't work 2 weeks. It's a mindset thing. Take a month off. So what? Who's going to see the patients? Not you. No one. It's fine. So that's one issue. This kind of feeling like you are a slave to the schedule of the practice. Those chains are easy to break. Then you've got kind of the micro issue, the day-to-day stresses of how do I cover hygiene and stay on time in my schedule and deal with staff problems and all the things the fears in the back of my head about embezzlement and collections and maybe a patient's going to write a bad review. That kind of pressure inside of the everyday operations could also cause someone to say, God, I don't like the pressure. I need a change. And instead of like actually solving those pressure points, like putting a little WD-40 there and kind of turning this knob down here, turning that knob up here, they just went out. They just went out of the situation, which is another way to do it. But I think that when you realize you're trading one pressure cooker for another one, maybe you'd be more open to understanding how to fix the first one instead of trading it for a more risky, bigger one. Because that's what happens when you add more dentists to more locations. You could have a situation, say, I had a life implosion this year because we grew too fast. I don't think you'll hear anyone say, I had a life implosion because we fixed my practice too well. Right. So like, which path are you going to go down to like get rid of your pressure? I think it's not actually about one being better than the other. It's about being educated on all of this so that in your life today, you see which one is going to give you the best predictable outcome. Whether that's not picking up a handpiece or being part-time or being full-time, one's not better than the other. They're different styles of a movie to watch. Do you want a thriller? Do you want a, romantic comedy, right? So it's about learning that. And then what am I in the mood for in my life today? Which one fits the best?
So Richard, I'm sorry. I think there's two things I want to say. My first thing is that, Scott and us at the Shared Practices team, we're going to work together and we're going to take his thoughts and philosophies, our thoughts and philosophies, and get aligned on what is the mutual agreeable understanding. And I think he's going to bring so much to our solo avatars. Because I can already see this mindset shift could help a lot of people and potentially keep them in that avatar, which is something, Richard, you've been saying for a long time. And so I'm just really excited to kind of get to the meat and potatoes of that and building courses and kind of doing that type of thing. And I think the second thing that I have is around what Scott just said about, making things sustainable. And I guess my question is, like, one thing that we get commonly is the entrepreneur, once they feel like their practice is done needing them so much, they have that like push and energy and drive to build and create, but their office doesn't need that anymore. And I think that that's something that, like, our answer to that has always been more, And so I think there's another answer, which is like somewhere else. And I think that's something that I want to ask Scott, like, when you get to that, when you've fixed your practice and it's humming along 55 miles an hour, kicking off the income you want, like, that entrepreneurial person still wants to express themselves and have active pursuit, but their practice doesn't need that anymore. And so, where do they put, like, is that like where you're advising people to put that in a hobby, or like kind of get some interest outside of the office that's, the active pursuit? But I think that's something that the entrepreneur always needs. And I'm curious, how do you help people navigate that? My practice doesn't need me anymore. What do I do with all this energy that I have?
It starts with how mature are you going to actually be in your life as an entrepreneur? So the immature thing would be to say, we got the success. Let's just keep rolling the die. Let's just keep playing, or let's go back to the table. I hit 21 4 times in a row. Let's keep on going. Let's just increase our bets. It's a very mature way of doing it, because that means the only game you're playing is short-term success. When you play long-term success, you'll recognize that that takes different chapters. So the first chapter is building an income stream that is more than you need and incredibly stable. So that's chapter one. And then what do you do with that excess income and the freed up time you've created? You take that income and now you go into chapter two. Chapter two says, I'm going to take my set for life money and I'm going to entrepreneurially protect it and grow it. Protect it being now an important component of what you're doing. And the next entrepreneurial venture is not going to take or add risk to that money. So I'm still not at a point in life where I can use my money to build the next thing. That would be very immature. So we're going to take the money we've made and we are going to protect it and have it grow in an entrepreneurial way that doesn't add risk to it. And the next venture, where we want to get our next high, our next build something new, is going to still be with other people's money. It is not going to ever risk what we built. Once our pot of money that's protected is big enough to always give us excess money, then we can go to the next chapter that says, I'm going to leverage my own excess money, maybe with other people's money, to build something even bigger. You see, we keep notching down the entrepreneurial path, solidifying our position to never go backwards. And it's rare I see people do that. They'll build a cash cow, and then the first thing they do is starve the cow. They starve it because they take away their time from it. They take away the money from it, and they go try to buy another cow. But they didn't increase how much grass they have to feed the first. So it's like they add more and more risk to their cash cow. What I'd rather see is protect your cash cow and protect all the milk you get from it until you got more milk than you know what to deal with. And that's finally the point where you get to build something even bigger with your own money. I don't know if I'm making sense with my crazy analogies, but I think in analogies all the time. Yeah. But what I'm trying to say is, what's a win? A win first is having more money and income that I'll ever need. Then the win is having more money stored that I'll ever need. Then the win is having that stored money make me more money than I'll ever need. And only at that point should I risk pieces of my stored money. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And the pitfalls here I really see are, number one, a lack of patience in this process. Because this requires that emotional maturity of, this is a good thing. I can screw this up by driving in lots of different directions. And there is part of this is this sense of fulfillment from solving this problem. There is an early career energy and drive to solve the problem of wealth and success. And for me, part of my multi-year midlife crisis that I've talked about on air has been that I can see the solution to that problem. And that problem I'm not, we're not there yet, but figuring out that problem created incredible momentum, energy, drive, fulfillment. And there was a void created when that problem got solved, but there's a future timestamp to it of like, it's solved, but I just have to be patient. And this created, problems for me and my health and stress in a weird way. It's like, okay, what do I do now? Like this was my all-consuming focus for a number of years. Now I have to enjoy life. Like it's stupid how that problem can be difficult for the entrepreneur of someone who
Oh
is
yeah.
very driven. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, and that would have been the perfect time for you to have had a coach, because I think a mature coach would have told you, let's get on the new fun game. But the rules of this new game are, we're not going to add health, time, and money risk to the accomplishments you've had up to this point. But it's going to be fun. It's going to be new. It's going to be new problems that you're going to love solving. It's going to be a new passion. But instead, you may have chosen to double up on the game you were in. And look, I'm not saying necessarily that's bad. We just have to understand what it all means. Like, it's great to go build 40 offices in 4 or 5 years and like have a huge valuation and all that. But that path, 9 times out of 10, doesn't end up at that point where you look back and say, that was what I expected and it was worth it. So often that path we think we want to go down because we're so excited and high from the thought of this massive success has all kinds of dangerous moments that will hurt people. They will hurt. Success will crush people because of what's behind the door of success is all the continuous chaos and crises and just breaking of your expectations and stretching of your physical and mental abilities. And what makes that easier is when you have people alongside of you to share, and when you have experts guiding you, that makes that all easier. But I'm worried that on this episode, I'm sounding like there's only one smart way, and that's to be small and to do it yourself. I'm not meaning that at all. I just want everyone to understand that as we go over these next few episodes, we can point out and describe today's way of being solo and smart, today's way of having associates and being smart, today's way of having lots of locations and being smart. And don't assume one's better than the other. But I see what most dentists want, and most dentists would be incredibly happy with that $1 million take-home pay, solo dentist, small operation, and lots of extra time. However, this podcast may be speaking a lot to the entrepreneurial crazy people like me, right? And you don't want just that. That's like good. That's a good appetizer, maybe. So I get something started, but you want more. Got it. That's going to be fun. It's going to be great. You have to understand the price of that and the smart way of doing it today.
This is
Yeah,
George, go for it.
I really love the patience and the chapters approach that Scott talked about, because I think that our avatars are linear progression. And I think that that's what Scott's talking about too, right? His avatars of full-time, part-time, no time is a linear progression. But I think maybe a difference is, Scott advocates for a progression, a pause, a chapter by chapter approach that the chapters build on each other. And, I think that's going to be something really good for us to implement and integrate into our philosophy, because there's something, I think patience is something that we haven't catered to and we really haven't had ourselves. And, I think it's going to be interesting to kind of bring that into the fold, because with, profitable, simple, sustainable, like sustainable patience and sustainability kind of go hand in hand with one another, where, it takes patience and content with where you are right now to truly have a sustainable setup. So I think on my side, like, if this is the first episode, it's fantastic, right? I mean, we just the I think shared practices has always been a place where we want conflicting ideas to come on air and discuss with each other. And I'm just really excited to keep going and keep learning about the different frameworks and all that Scott has to bring to the podcast. So I think those are kind of my remarks. Richard, what does this leave for you?
For me in particular, I think we have not created the solution for what's next after creating success. And this is what's really exciting for me is that piece that Scott just talked about of um, this next phase of your life and protecting wealth and not shifting into other area because the other thing to do is, oh, okay, I've been a successful entrepreneur in dentistry. Now I'm going to go be an entrepreneur somewhere else, or now I'm going to go grow that money aggressively. Now I'm going to all these other things, and this systematic way of this is a new chapter, and included in this chapter is protecting this kind of sacred cow and this ability to um, protect that wealth you've built before you go risking that wealth you've built in the next thing. So um, there's so much to talk about, so much to go into. I'm incredibly excited, and it's funny because we've always on this podcast been talking to people who are 1 or 2 or 3 steps, into this process, and with Scott having lived this, practice, stepping back, building multi-practice, building something else, you're just further down the road than those of us at shared practices, and there are so few people that have done all of these things and seen all the different ways you can do it and seen the pitfalls along the way, that we're just grateful to have you here, having gone a few steps down and now able to help George and I and the partners at shared practices, but more importantly our audience, and helping people understand the pros and cons of all these approaches. And so we're going to get into these different aspects. But Scott, anything else to wrap us up before we close out this episode?
Yeah, I think. Well, first of all, because this is episode one, so I need to comment on this whole idea of us being on a podcast together is awesome because we all represent a different component of the entrepreneurial side of dentistry, and we've all had pretty remarkable experiences and remarkable pains and scars, and maybe more important than that, we've all got this willingness to share and help that comes from truth within, as opposed to some podcasts that are just selling a bunch of stuff. You know what I mean? Trying to act like there's someone that they're not because they've got other intentions. So when you bring really nice people that want to do good and they've had plenty of pains, that they can speak honestly about things and not be scared at maybe disagreeing, it creates this wonderful environment where everyone listening and the three of us get to learn all kinds of new things that make us see our own lives just a bit differently. And the moments in life that allow us to see things just a bit differently are really cool, valuable moments. So I'm very thankful that we all had kind of the leap of faith to do this together and see what comes of it.
This is
Wow.
amazing. George, anything else to wrap us up?
No, I just I'll echo everything that Scott said. I'm really thankful for the opportunity to bring him on to reboot the podcast and have a 2.0 version where we recreate again and go back to the drawing board and build new ideas with new people with new perspectives. And that's always what made shared practices great, is that we're not one person's ideas, we're all of our ideas. And I think that's going to something we continue moving forward. So I'm super excited, and I'll let you two kind of finish out the next 2 episodes for the week, and I'm going to be tuning in like everyone else on the Shared Practices podcast.
Well, our listeners, thank you guys for your patience of the journey we've been on at Shared Practices, rebooting. If this was of value to you, leave a review, share this with someone, post about this. If you're excited, let someone know, because this is going to change lives and careers. This is going to change people's perspective, and hopefully save people pain, save people suffering, and give them clarity, give them purpose, fulfillment in their life, improve their families. Dentistry provides an amazing opportunity for us to do good in the world, for ourselves, our families, and those around us. And if we've gotten caught up in the game of making more money, we've fallen short of our potential. So please share this podcast in whatever way you are excited about. And we'll talk to you next time on Shared Practices 2.0.